Hey everyone, my name is Luke Eidenschink. I'm a traditional artist specializing in pen and ink illustration. And in this four-part video series, I'm going to take you step by step through the illustration process as I create this fantasy drawing. I'm going to be using all the materials that you see over my shoulder. So let's go through those materials in a little bit more detail, and then we can get started on the project. All right, so this is everything that I'll be using on this drawing. Quality paper is probably the most important part of any drawing, and I like to use the Strathmore Bristol. This is Bristol 500. They also make a Bristol 300. I use both of them. I especially like the 500 because of this super smooth plate surface. What that means for dip pens especially is that that pointed nib is going to glide on the smooth surface, much less likely to get snagged. And I also like the quality, nice thick paper that's going to hold a crisp ink line. That ink line is not going to feather out or bleed at all, as long as you have a good quality ink, which I have here. A couple different kinds that I like to use. I'll probably be using this Calli. It's a really nice jet black India ink, you can see here, but it really makes a nice crisp black line. I love it. This FW acrylic ink, also good. I especially like the fact that it comes in a big jug because, as you can imagine, I go through a ton of ink. So a lot of my drawings, I use a pencil to lay out a basic plan before I start inking. So I'm going to use a pencil, and the lines eventually do get erased when I'm done with the inking, so I have that eraser. And last but not least, of course, I do have a variety of dip pens that I will be using to apply that ink. So there you have it. Those are the materials I'll be using. Now let's get started. And here we go, picking up where we left off. Our foreground is done. And now I'm going to work on the tree line, which is slightly behind the foreground and behind the dragon. Now my goal here is to create a more or less uniform mid-gray tone. And I'm doing that by making these small sections of interconnected hatching. I could just as easily have probably gone with one solid row of lines going either maybe horizontally or diagonally all the way across the page. But I decided on these smaller patches of interconnected lines just because it adds a little visual interest. And also I know that I'm going to be making the sky with more or less long angled lines. So this is yet another bit of pre-planning in my head that want to set that tree line apart in tone and texture, and also line direction from the background as well as the foreground. So all ties in with the planning. You can see that I've also added some falling bits of debris kind of coming off the dragon as it rises up from below, which is another way of adding some action, some movement in the piece. And at this point, I'm switching to this gray ink. It's a cool gray acrylic ink, and it's an additional way of sort of, now that we're going into the far background, into the distance, it's a way of setting that background apart from the foreground, ensuring that it doesn't confuse with the foreground. Now you could also use a diluted black ink for this too. You could take a little black ink, mix it with some distilled water, and create a more of a translucent ink, which would have a similar effect. The gray ink is nice because it remains opaque, even though it's a lighter tone. So I made a uniform gray tone with the large moon, and with the smaller moon, I'm just making the dot placement a little bit tighter, a little closer together. And that has the effect of setting that moon apart from the other one. That way, visually, they don't confuse. You can clearly see that there's two moons there. My dot placement is rather imprecise and organic. I don't really think about it. I've just sort of trained myself over the years to kind of, with muscle memory, put those dots down in the pattern that I do. And at this point, I've let everything dry really well, and I just want to erase some of those lines. You can't really see it here, but those lines sort of confuse the drawing at some point. I just want to get those out of my way, wipe it off with a brush, kind of clean that background area so that I can start in with the long lines for the background. I'm using a finer nib here just to make a nice kind of uniform fine line, and still using the gray ink. If I were using black ink here, it would be a little too much. It would confuse a bit with the subjects, and you wouldn't see the same sort of separation of layers. And you can see how adding those lines, creating the background, really makes the foreground kind of pop. It makes all of the areas that I've left blank, all the white space, really comes alive when I put that gray tone down. All the white jumps forward. And just to point out again that the lines that I'm doing in the sky, I really could have called the drawing finished at a couple of stages. I could have called it finished right after we finished the wizard and the foreground plus the dragon. That could have been finished. Again, it could have been considered finished after adding the trees. So with every progression back, I'm just adding another layer and giving it more depth, but I wouldn't necessarily have to do that. It just depends on your intent when you're creating the piece. Here again, you can see how putting down those lines really makes that swirl coming off of the swirl of energy off the wizard's hand just comes to life. And part of that circling back process that I mentioned in previous videos, I looked at the moon, decided I wanted that moon to kind of be a little more obvious. And so I'm just going and I'm making a very thin line around the edge of the moon, added some texture to the moons, and now I'm thickening some of the lines back to the black ink, thickening some of the lines on that wizard's robe because I want him to stand out just a little bit more. And I'm adding a little more darkness, a little more texture to that foreground for the same reason, just to make it stand out. And there we go. Finished drawing. So that concludes this 4-part series. I hope you enjoyed following along in the process and seeing this drawing come together. And I hope that it inspires you to pick up a pen and do some inking of your own. So thanks so much for watching, and happy inking.